is Salida and this is
Carlos Tanner.
and we are gonna tell you good stories about ayahuasca. Do you have a good story?
I have a lot of good stories.
Tell me one.
I think one of the most important stories in my personal journey with ayahuasca was very early on in my first 5 ceremonies in a very real way, very much like a dream, like when you find yourself in a scene in a dream. And it was a scene from my life, but it was a memory that I had forgotten, except that when I witnessed it very quickly, I remembered. And that we didn't have enough money for all 4 children. And she named me, that we couldn't afford me. And I think she was basically trying to say that, she was upset that my father had made the decision that he had, that it hadn't worked out, and that we were, anyway, I interpreted that to mean that it was my fault. And so I was witnessing the formation of a false belief that would become an infection into my life from then on, where I would always think that I was a burden. And so I started to reject any gifts, and I never wanted to have a birthday party, and I didn't want to have presents, and I refused to have new clothes for school, any of those things, because I didn't want my parents to spend money on me, because I felt like I was the reason why they ultimately would separate, get a divorce, that my brothers would even get into trouble. Like, I just started blaming everything on myself. And that infected the dynamics of my relationship, not only with my parents, but with every person that I encountered. And as I got older, it started to really, I was watching the scene, but I was my 27-year-old or 28-year-old self, and I was in the room. And so I was able to go and pick my 8-year-old self up and embrace him and hug him and tell him, this is not your fault. And then start the process of forgiveness and recovery and restoration of those family dynamics. But it was a really core moment for me where I felt like I was able to mend a wound that had formed in my heart, that I felt like had allowed the love to spill out that I should have had for myself in my child, misinterpreting experiences from their childhood.
But don't you think, and that's what happened, like I was introduced to ayahuasca because of you, because my family had different practices because we are from the north and the highlands of Peru, right? But when I do a past life regression, when I do a family constellations, the person comes to me knowing their issue. Like, this is what is wrong in my life. But then what is revealed in a session or with a ceremony, because it has happened to me, is something probably that wasn't what I was expecting. It's something different, right? But what for me is, what I'm trying to say is like the sessions or a ceremony will bring you what you need to see or what you need to acknowledge as the first step in that healing journey. I don't remember exactly the first ceremony that I had with you, but in at Otilia's, I was working in the Congress and I was very young, and you said, I asked the plant what you want to see. And at that moment, I asked the plant, should I keep working in the Congress? Because it was the best job that a lawyer can have, but it was the worst job for my soul. I was sick. And I didn't see anything about my job. I don't remember seeing that when you threw a dart, how you call that thing, the black and
the dartboard.
Yeah. And then I opened my eyes and I saw my grandmother and my aunt. And then I start seeing all these people's colors that I was crying. And then with other ceremonies, and the last ceremony, well, not the last ceremony, the ceremony that I went with my family in 2021 to Peru with my niece, I wanted to see, no, it was 2020, yeah, 2022. Sorry, we went with Becky. And Vivi just passed in March. Vivi was our dog. And I was still grieving and mourning. And do you remember? Like I was like telling you, I see the sky on the way to the lodge. Like I know that in this ceremony I'm gonna see Vivi. And I saw Lakshmi for the first time, and she said the dog is not gonna come because you keep crying, and she's not gonna come. And I started getting antsy, like anxiety, like not anxiety, like like because that was the only ceremony that I was making during that trip because I needed to fly back. And now I see Vivi a lot. I have told you, right? So how people can understand that what the plant brings to me is really what I need to see and experience, besides my expectations and what in my conscious mind I think that is the right thing for me now.
Well, sure. I mean, I think that we all have a way of describing what is out of balance or what is wrong with us, essentially. But there is the root cause of that. So it's kind of like if you see what grows from a root and you see a plant and you say, oh, that's the plant, but it's the roots of that that created all that growth. And so for me, like I knew that I had a problem with my mom and our relationship was really bad. And I knew I wanted to heal that. But how I could heal that, it was like really helpful to go to that root where I had formed that false belief, which was a story that I had told myself that wasn't true, but that it had been the way that I identified. And it was the story of my identity. And so when I changed that story of my identity, then it opened the door and created the space for true forgiveness. I definitely feel like ayahuasca works in an energetic space and in with our energies. And that's really the context that I find it most accurate to understand. And so sometimes ayahuasca will show us something because of the impact it will have on our energy. And
That it will.
yeah, that, like, for example, it's very common that people see snakes or jaguars or hummingbirds. Those are probably the three most common forms that ayahuasca can take, or at least that are part of visions. And it's very interesting that they're like universal, whether you grew up in a city on the other side of the planet or not, you like have these. And I'm not totally sure, but I do know that if a hummingbird comes into my presence, into my environment, sold and shared love and corrected what I knew to be the false belief, I shifted my energy. My energy frequency changed. And we can look at that like a spectrum, which is what I often use now, of negative 100 to positive 100 as a spectrum of energy. And if I was feeling a state of guilt, then I was feeling a negative energy frequency. And if I could transform that into a state of love, then I would transform that energy frequency into a positive energy frequency. That's one way that I look at the healing process, is that it's a transformation of our energy, where we let go of our low frequency, our negative energies, and allow our authentic energies to shine through, because we are not born into negative energies. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes there are negative energies that play a role in our birth because of the...
Have you ever felt? Well, I'm gonna keep with my good story. My good story is about my niece Alexa. Well, I said her name. She was 20 or 21 years old. That was 2021. In 1 September of that year, she got thrombosis on her one part of her intestine, and at the same time, she couldn't walk anymore. So we went, at least me, we went specifically to do a ceremony with her. And was it Rono? Rono. And my sister, and you took our daughter to the second floor of the lodge, and you said something to me. Don't get involved in her experience, just be there, right? And I was there, and I told her, like, if you need anything, I'm gonna be next to you. And I can hear, like, as the ceremony goes and Rono is singing, she was crying. Then she called me. Actually, this is my sound. I don't know if it is a good story, but it's a funny story. Like, because I couldn't see, because I was waiting for her to say my aunt or tia. I went so fast that I put my hand inside her pocket, but I forgot about it at the moment. And then she said that she's like, I see a fish. It looks like a fish, she started telling me. And it's eating the
Clot.
clot on my intestine. She didn't have her menstruation when we started the ceremony, and she started having her menstruation at that moment. And the next day, she went back to, we went back to Iquitos, and she was walking. But I'm gonna get to this point now. But the next year, but that this is about more ancestral healing. The next year, at the same on the same date, she got another thrombosis on her brain, and I called her and we did a meditation, and she saw the same fish that looks a little bit different than a fish, but it's a fish, eating that thrombosis. And within 2 days, when they did a test again, she didn't have it. And the doctors, they didn't understand how she couldn't have it. The point is that this is a good story because now she's doing very well, she's successful, she's a good girl. But the point for me is like, I don't think that, for example, when I'm going to do a clearing of something really negative, I will call Michael Archangel, right? I'm going to call the angels, but basically Michael Archangel and Saint Benedict. But the thing is like, do you think that ayahuasca has allies? So she can work and call, like she could call Michael Archangel because they might be friends. They are in the same frequency, this very high frequency. So what I feel is that fish represented for my niece an ally of ayahuasca, or ayahuasca transformed in that fish to help her because that's what she needed. So don't you do you feel that ayahuasca works by herself? I'm gonna say she, or she has another allies as spirits or another entities that can help together as a.
Well, now we're getting into the complexities of the ayahuasca tradition, and I think that's really good. It's very important to be able to talk about this in the proper context, which is as part of a very rich heritage of traditional knowledge and wisdom that's passed down for many generations within indigenous tribes, as opposed to a more modern perspective, which is that the drug contains chemicals, and when the chemicals are ingested, they have effects. Both are true, but working in the space, I guess both are true in the same sense that a musical instrument is a tool that produces sound, and by moving it in a particular way, you can create different notes. And so that's like the mechanics. The mechanics of ayahuasca are definitely that there is chemistry and it does have an effect and an interaction with our biology. But then there's the musician. And the musician is the person that uses that tool to produce the actual music. And that's very different. You can't just hand a guitar to anyone and expect them to be able to play good music on it. In that sense, this is a metaphor for the healers that are serving the ayahuasca and leading the ceremony.
For the curandero.
Exactly. And so a curandero is someone who has developed relationships with many elements of nature and their own ancestors, and maybe even, outside of this world or the other. And so when they open a ceremony, they're typically calling to their allies. So it's not really that ayahuasca is calling to her allies. Right. It's that, but they are all in collaboration. And because of their unique frequency, not unique frequency, that the level of frequency is in a dimension that's very similar. The same way that I could call someone in this town, but if I knew them, obviously calling them would increase highly the likelihood that they come over to assist me. And so the curandero spends their life developing these relationships, and then when they open an ayahuasca ceremony, they call to these allies, to these teacher plants, to these spirits, to their ancestors, to these beings to come to the ceremony, to be present. And in that sense, beyond being a musician that plays an instrument, they really become like a conductor, conducting this symphony of healing spirits. And then it is in that collaborative effort that ayahuasca works together with these other plant spirits and with these spirits of other beings to achieve those transformations of energy and a coming to know a truth that she had not known her whole life. And that I do feel like I would call like a root cause. That there was a conflict in her own energy, in her inability to understand a crucial piece of her identity. And that came through in her interaction, I believe, with a dead relative, in that she was able to interact with in the ceremony.
She interacted with my abuelita, so that's my grandmother, my dad's mom, and with her original her paternal grandmother, which she didn't know that it was her grandmother up until then. They both has already passed, and I was next to her while she was talking with my abuelita, so I can hear the conversation, but I didn't know that she was talking to my grandmother. But she saw a lot of, also I remember a lot of, besides the fish that is the most remarkable, she saw a lot of, she was saying like a lot of little like duendes. How do you say duendes? Elves, like tiny ones. But she was saying like they were so tiny, tiny, tiny around, and they would be dancing, dancing. And she was like, "Why am I seeing that?" So when she saw them, she said that she was so sad and she was crying so much that she laughed. So it was like a wave of like like I'm very sad, probably I'm scared, and then these guys are making me laugh, and then I go back like a wave. And of course, I do believe on elves because my maternal grandmother has worked with elves before. In fact, I have seen elves. You remember in our house in Lima, we had one. But that's what I was trying to say. Like there is this collaboration of a lot of entities that come through, right. Because they might feel comfortable coming. Because imagine now that we are having a talk. Do you think that? Oh no, Buddha's gonna come now? I don't think so because we are just recording this, right?
Well, that is another complexity in, like I said, this is a universe, a galaxy, this tradition. It is so deep. But another way of understanding it, and it is the way that the curanderos would describe it, is the world of spirits. And ayahuasca gives you access to the world of spirits. And so it might not be necessary for a curandero to call that spirit to you. In fact, the curandero is often not calling like your relatives who have passed on, but you're able to interact with them, to see them or to hear them or to feel their presence because you have been brought into, or that the world of spirits has been opened for you. And that is the work of the curandero. Although we could accomplish that to various degrees on our own, or at least some people can. And so in that sense, like if you fly yourself to another part of this world, and as an example or a metaphor or a way of understanding how it might be if you visit the world of spirit, which I think is that higher frequency of energy, then you may encounter the beings that live in that dimension.
Yeah.
And some of those beings are spirits that might already be around you and acknowledge or know that you're able to commune with them. And so they're like excited. Great, I finally get to like see you. And so in your own ceremony that first time, it was almost as soon as you passed through or into that world of spirits, your relatives were right there. They were like, oh, here we are. Like we're here all the time, but you can't actually have the depth or quality of experience that you're having now because you're not able to open that world to us normally. Although sometimes we can in dreams. Dreams would be an opportunity where we can enter into that dimension or that world of spirit. But ayahuasca allows us to do it in a conscious way.
But can I talk to you about the world of spirits? Because you know that I see spirits or that I see things and I haven't figured out how to control the things. And talking about the world of spirits is also the frequency that I have, right? That morphic field that I carry. So I have to be responsible for what I bring from my own personal consciousness and the consciousness of the universe to my experience, right? And Do you remember when I was pregnant and I called you and this guy was choking me? You were having a ceremony and I had the two dogs sleeping with me at my mom's. And I can see you in the ceremony, but you cannot see me. But the guy looked at me and started choking me, and the dogs didn't do much. But so that's one thing that I think that is that the lower, I call it a lower astral, right? Or for example, when I can see after that women's retreat that I just did in October, I flew back and within 2 weeks I didn't know that we were having a ceremony in Roswell, and I saw the ceremony. Remember that I called Pancho and I told him and I saw these people. So how does that play out? Because for me, it's like I know that I have the capacity to see things that are bad for people, right? People dying, people is gonna die soon or they get sick. But how do you think that that plays in the worlds of spirits? Why will the guy choke me if I am an innocent wife sleeping pregnant in Lima? You know?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously that is very complicated because you're my wife.
Because you're my wife.
In the Peruvian perspective, there is the middle world, which is the world that we inhabit. Then there's the lower world and the higher world, the upper world. And so the healers and curanderos would work with that upper world, but sometimes they need to go into those lower worlds as well. And I do think that one way of understanding that is looking at music again in the music frequency or the sound frequencies of notes and an octave, so if we could imagine that we live in the middle octave, that there's an octave above us and an octave below us, those are notes that are a higher frequency and a lower frequency. And I think that exists in energy as well. Now, there are 7 notes in a musical scale, at least 7 original notes. And then the 8th note is the repeat of the first note. And the first note is the 8th note of the lower frequency. And the 8th note is also the first note of the higher octave. So they're connected and overlap in the edges. And one thing that ayahuasca does, which is enabling us to experience those upper and lower worlds, is it expands our sensory perceptive ability. But to answer the question of like why, I don't think that there is anything random. So I certainly don't think that was random. The reason I said it was because you were my wife is because
we share the same field.
There have been people that don't agree with the fact that I'm spreading indigenous wisdom to cultures outside of the Amazon. People, disagree with that type of work because I think that I can understand it because, colonizing cultures don't have a great reputation. Have definitely mistreated the indigenous people in many ways. Iquitos, Peru exists because of the rubber boom, where the indigenous tribes were enslaved, essentially passed on some very detrimental energy frequencies.
Intergenerational.
Yeah. And there was this person basically suffering, seemingly innocent, because they themselves had not committed any of these acts, but yet they were born and carried the energies of those acts with them. And in order to release those, it was necessary to go into those lower frequencies.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.